changing up the schedule for the Rally Sundays because what I was noticing was having it only in the summertime conflicted with summer vacation plans, and so I thought, why don't we have it throughout the year? So that's why we're having it today, and then the next one is scheduled for in May. So for today, our speaker is Marie Monville. Her life was dramatically impacted by the nickel mines incident, and she is going to be talking about that today and sharing with you how God used that situation to bring about redemption, to bring her on the path of healing. So I think we will find it to be very, very hopeful. Now, she has there's a table out in the front, and she's selling her book, One Light Still Shines. I read the book. It was published in 2013. It's her story. There's also another book written by her former mother-in-law, Terry Roberts, and her book is called Forgiven, and it's about her the relationships that she was able to make with the Amish families who were impacted by her son's actions. So 2 different books there. Both are very good. So Marie, if you would come up, I'll pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, I ask for your blessing and your presence to be on our meeting today. May Marie speak your words, and I just pray that your message would impact our lives. And if we are struggling with brokenness, Lord, that we would understand that you bring about healing. Thank you for this opportunity, and again, I ask for your blessing upon Marie. In your name, amen.
Amen. Well, good morning. It's a privilege to be here with you all this morning and to share a bit of my story with you. And, God invites us on these redemption stories where we get to partner with him in what he's doing in our lives. And I think when I think about what I thought my life was going to be when I was a young girl growing up in rural Lancaster County, and when I compare it to what it actually is now that I'm an adult, it's nothing like I thought. It's not one bit of what I imagined life would be when I was in my 40s, but I can say that I love what God has done in my life. When I was a little girl growing up, I thought that all I wanted to do was be a wife and a mom. When I was going through high school, getting great grades, all of my teachers thought that I should go off to college, and I said, no, I'm going to get married and have kids, and that's what I want to do with my life. I had met Charlie when I was in church in my high school years, and we got married after I graduated. I thought life was going to be this big blank canvas, and I could paint it any way I chose. I thought, check mark number 1 off the list. I'm a wife. What could be better than this? We found out in our first year of marriage that we were going to have a child. So I thought, check mark number 2. I'm going to be a mom, exactly the way I wanted. My mom used to say of me that I had everything so well organized, it was as if I had my ducks in a row, height-wise, color-coded, and alphabetized. I am no longer like that. But, I think a lot of us have these dreams. We have these aspirations for our lives, these things, these places where we feel like God is calling us, or these things that he's asking us to do. But we have no idea the path that he's going to take to accomplish them. Because yes, I am married, and yes, I am a mom, but the process by which all of that unfolded and the things that have happened in the years since, they were not on my radar. And I think, especially for me, if I think about the hard places in my life, if someone would have said to me, hey Marie, tomorrow this thing is going to happen, and it's going to be really hard, and it's going to feel really overwhelming, but you're going to find a way to make it through because God is going to be there in the midst of it, and he's going to walk with you, and he's going to help you every step of the way, even when you don't understand how to make it or to believe that you could make it. He's going to be faithful. If someone would have had that kind of conversation with me any day, the day before a hard event, I probably wouldn't have believed them. I probably would have thought, well, there's no way I can get through that. There's no way that I'm going to be able to overcome that. And I can say that not just about the events at the Amish schoolhouse in October of 2006, but in a lot of events before that. Charlie and I lost our first daughter at 26 weeks of pregnancy. She was born premature and died in our arms 20 minutes later. And for me, I remember that season. I remember wrestling with God. I had grown up in church. I had asked Jesus in my heart when I was 5. I had read my Bible. I sang on the worship team. I had gone on mission trips. And suddenly in that season of my life, I found myself in a place where I had to come to grips with the reality that I didn't authentically trust God. I wanted a guarantee that my life was going to go exactly the way I had planned. And I knew that there was no guarantee. And I remember that season and the difficulty of trying to let go of what I wanted, this desire to be a mom, and surrender that to the Lord. And it was hard. And I remember one morning saying to him, God, you must be so disappointed in me because I know that I don't authentically trust you. And I know that you're not the problem, it's me. I have read what's in the Word. I have seen other people talk about the things that you've done in their lives. I know that you are trustworthy, but God, somehow I can't seem to get what I know here into my heart. And would you help me? And I felt him saying to me, you know what, Marie, I'm not disappointed in you because I've known your entire life that you didn't trust me. Even though you're just figuring this out now, I've known it all along. You always want that guarantee. You always want things to go the way you plan. But if you'll let me, I'll help you through this. And I thought that was amazing, but I didn't know what the first step was. I thought, if I haven't figured out in all these years how to trust God, how am I supposed to do this now? But I felt like he was saying to me, I just want you to open your hands and let go of the things that you've held on to so tightly for so long. And there were days that I could do that. There were times that I could let go of that desire to be a mom. And there were days that I closed my hands back up again. And it was frustrating to me because I wanted to feel like I was always making progress in the right direction. I like the straightest distance between 2 points. It's always that straight line. I want to get there as fast as possible. But there are places in our journey, especially in our walk with God, that aren't a straight line. And they don't happen as quick as we'd like them to. And I think, especially in our American culture where we can have almost anything instantaneously, sometimes it's difficult to surrender ourselves to the process by which God works in our lives. But his process is always the best plan. Because I can look at all of the events of my life, not just October 2nd, 2006, but I can look at all of the things that God has done and say, I couldn't be here today. I couldn't be who I am today had God not walked so faithfully with me through that journey. I look at that season of loss, and I know that if he hadn't shown me, if he hadn't helped me to see that I didn't authentically trust him then, there's no way that I could have been able to trust him in the moment of walking through the aftermath of Charlie's choices in 2006. To come to terms that day with the reality that not only was I suddenly a single mom, that I was going to have to leave my 3 children. We had 3 children at that point. There were 7, 5, and a year and a half. That I would have to lead them on this journey and want to help them find their healing. But also to think about the way that Charlie chose to leave. To find God in the midst of that situation, I'm sure that God would want to be found. But I think for me, I can look at that prior season of saying, God, you helped me to learn to trust you then. And wow, was I ever going to need it now? Was I ever going to need it in that season of 2006? And to me, it highlights his faithfulness. And I don't think that he allowed me to lose my first daughter so that I would learn to trust him. But I think that God's plan is always redemption. It doesn't matter how big or how small the difficulties are in our lives. He plans something more than that because he sees the whole picture. We see this little thing. I often get very focused on the little thing, but God sees all of it. And one of the things that I love about the Lord is that he's not expecting us to be perfect. He's not expecting me to always say, okay, I trust you, God. I have 0 doubts. I know you're going to do this. There are days when I feel that way. But there are also days when I'm saying, God, I'm really struggling to see how you're going to work this out. I'm struggling to have the patience to make it through. I'm struggling to believe that I am going to be able to overcome this. I think we all have these places in our lives where, yes, we embrace the reality of who God is, but we also embrace the reality of who we are. And he's not asking us to be perfect. He's not expecting us to be perfect. We read through the pages of the Word, and if there's anything we see in there, I think it's this aspect of realizing that God understands our humanity, that he gets who we are. And one of the passages that I particularly love comes out of Mark. In chapter 9, there's this father who comes to Jesus because he wants healing for his son. And, when Jesus spoke, when he met people right where they were, when he came to minister to them, he was surrounded by crowds, thousands of people. So I can't even imagine how difficult it was for that man to get to Jesus. I try to think about things and how would that look today? How can I see that so I can really understand? And I think about it as if, someone was going to a concert. Let's say you were going to a concert and you wanted to go all the way up to see those people at the front of the stage, but you were in the back and there were all these people around, plus the security team. How would you ever be able to fight your way through and get up there? That's kind of how I feel about this father. He was determined to get his son to Jesus because there was this place inside of him where he thought, okay, I've heard about this guy. I've taken my son to other people. Nobody's been able to help him, but maybe this one can. So he comes to Jesus and he has this conversation with him. And he says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus says to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the boy's father cried out and said, I do believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus heals the boy, but I wonder if the greater miracle didn't happen in the dad. Because Jesus says to him, what do you mean if I can? Of course I can heal him. And the father is honest and he says, I do believe, but help my unbelief. He was willing to admit that he didn't always operate at 100% belief level. He said, I believe, but help my unbelief. And that gives me encouragement. It gives me hope that on the days when I'm saying, okay, Jesus, I believe, but help my unbelief, that he's going to meet me right where I am. And he's going to continue to do the things in my life that he wants to do without me having to always try to be at 100%. I think God gets the reality of who we are. If there's one person that constantly points out to me that God's not asking me to be perfect, it's David. I mean, we can read David's story and we see the high highs that he had and the low lows and the choices that he made. And God called him a man after his own heart. And there's nothing about David that was perfect, but he always lived with his heart open to the Lord. And so when I think about my journey with God and I think about the things that God has done and the kind of person that I want to be and the relationship that I want to have with God, I want to come from this place of saying, God, I'm going to live with my heart open. I'm going to be authentic. I'm not going to just give you a story that I think you want to hear. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth on the days when I'm operating at 100% and I'm excited about what you're doing in my life. But God, I'm going to tell you the truth on the days when it's hard, on the days when I don't see the end of the story, and I certainly don't see it materializing the way I wanted. God, I'm still going to stay invested in my relationship with you and believe that you can do things that I can't imagine because that's who you are. And I think for me, I can look at those seasons of my life and say, well, I can stand on the belief that God does more than I could think or ask or imagine, and that all things are possible to him who believes, because I've seen the way that he's brought redemption and restoration in my life. In the season of 2006 of parenting my kids through the struggle of trying to understand who I was supposed to be in the midst of this story, it was a place for me to lean into who God is and the opportunity he offers to not be strong, but be okay with my weakness. You know, the thought of waking up every day and knowing that I was going to have to continue to live from a place of knowing what my husband had done, that was hard for me. It was difficult to know that would be an element of who I was forever. But I also felt the hope of God saying that this wasn't all my life would be, that it wasn't the whole story, that he still had more to add to the story. And I remember standing in my living room that very first day after the police had been at my home and they had talked about what had happened in the schoolhouse, and trying to understand that the man that I loved, who so loved his children, could possibly be capable of doing what he had done. I remember this moment where I felt like God was asking me to make a choice of what I would believe my life to be. And I closed my eyes and I said, God, I know the enemy thinks that he won in the schoolhouse, but he has not won here. And this is not going to be the day that my kids look back upon and say, from October 2nd, 2006, our lives were over. Yes, this will be a very difficult day, and undoubtedly it will be a very hard season. But God, I believe that we will be victorious because of who you are. Whatever you can do with this, do it. But if you would have asked me after I prayed that prayer, Marie, what is it that you think God can do with this? I don't really know what I would have said to you. I mean, I'm sure I would have said that I was believing for God to bring healing in my life and in the lives of my children, in the Amish community, in everyone that was impacted by this. But I wouldn't have been able to give you specifics of what that would look like. It's been 16 years. And in the time since that day, I've watched the way that God has brought restoration and redemption and healing, not just in me and in my children, but in the Amish community and in first responders, in other lives that were touched. And I think as I look back upon all those kind of mile markers in that journey, all the places of significance, some that stand out the most to me were conversations that either I or my family had with the Amish community. In the hours just following the news and the unfolding of events on October 2nd, I went to my parents' home with my kids. I thought, I can't stay at my house. The media is coming. I'm going to go to my parents' house. Where would you want to be more than at your mom and dad's home? And I was sitting in my parents' living room, and I was thinking about the fact that I was going to have to tell my kids what had happened. And I could hear them out in the backyard playing with my mom and dad. And I wanted to soak in the sound of their laughter because I thought, I don't know when I will ever hear this again. And I remember saying, God, you have to fix this. This was not supposed to be their life. And I can't fix this, but you have to. And I felt him give me the encouragement that he wasn't going to fix it, but he was going to redeem it. And as I thought about that phrase, that he wasn't going to fix it, but that he was going to redeem it, it took the weight off my shoulders. Because as a single mom, I knew that every choice I made, every word I spoke, was even more important than ever before. And if I wanted to help my kids find healing for their loss, I needed to be the kind of mom that continually led them to the Lord. These were the things that I was thinking even in those first hours as our day unfolded. But God took the weight off my shoulders, that I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to do it all right. I just had to live with my heart open to him and let him be the one that brought redemption. Later that afternoon, I was in my parents' kitchen and I was looking out the window and I was thinking, how did I wake up this morning, a stay-at-home mom, 3 kids, a fairly average life in Lancaster County, completely unknown, and by lunchtime, everything had changed. I was then a single mom with 3 kids, and the whole world knew the story. And I was thinking, how does this happen? It was as if, I had crossed from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other, and there was no way to go back. And as I'm thinking all these things, I look out the window and I saw some Amish men walking down the street, and I knew they were coming to my parents' home. This is the town that I had grown up in. My grandparents had a business where they picked up milk at the farm and took it to the dairy. I had been to many of these Amish farms. We had bought produce from their roadside stands and flowers from their greenhouses. These people were not strangers to me. And I remember seeing them, knowing they were coming and thinking, I have nothing to offer them. What could I possibly give them in light of everything they faced? I thought about the questions they might ask me. Everyone was asking me for answers to account for Charlie's choices, and I didn't have answers. I just had unanswerable questions. And so I went to my parents and said, the Amish men are coming and I don't know what to do. And my dad said, "It's okay, Marie, you can stay inside and I'll go out and talk with them." I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw everything. I saw the way they put their hands on his shoulders. I saw the tears that flowed down everyone's faces and the way they embraced before they walked away. And when he came inside, we waited for him to collect himself from the emotion of that moment. And he said, "Marie, they came because they were concerned about you. They were concerned about your kids. They wanted you to know that they had forgiven Charlie, and they were extending grace and compassion over your family." And that was not what I expected. I was expecting them to ask me for answers, and instead they weren't coming to get anything from me at all. Instead, they came to give this gift, to talk about the forgiveness that God had already put in their hearts and the way they were acting on that. And if you ask me what has been the biggest change that has happened because of your relationship with the Amish community, I would say that it's my perspective on forgiveness. Because it's really easy to think that forgiveness is this thing that happens when someone knows that they've hurt us and they come to us and they want to take responsibility for that and make amends. But my choice to forgive Charlie, the Amish community's choice to forgive Charlie, it had nothing to do with Charlie. Instead, it was this place where we allowed God to come in and do something that no one else could do. And I think that's really what forgiveness is about. It's about opening our heart up to the Lord and saying, "God, there's this place inside of me that is broken. And even if the other person apologized for that and wanted to rebuild our relationship, God, that's not going to really bring the kind of healing that I need. The healing I need can only come from you." And God offers us this great exchange where we can lay aside the weight we're carrying, the pain we know, and embrace his healing. And he offers us that great exchange in every area of our life. It's not just forgiveness. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your soul." There's a lot of heaviness that we feel in this life. Whether it's forgiveness or some other pain that we know, stress, worrying about the future, all these things. And in every one of those places, God says the same thing. "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your soul." And that's what I found as he led me through that forgiveness journey. And forgiveness isn't usually this one-time event. I think our hearts are a lot like an onion, and it's just one little layer at a time. And so maybe we go to the Lord and he helps us through some part of this forgiveness process, and we walk away and we think, "Okay, I've forgiven them." And then maybe a week or two later, something happens completely out of the blue, and we feel like it's that one step forward and two steps back. And we think, how is it that I'm back in this place of feeling the pain? God, I thought I already met you about this, and I thought that I had forgiven them. But I think each time he allows us to feel the pain, it's because he wants to take the healing to a deeper level. And God is gentle. And he won't push us further than we can go, but he wants us to get it all. He wants us to release all the pain so that we can receive all that he has to offer us. I knew that I wanted to love my kids authentically. But I knew that if I didn't choose to forgive Charlie, anger and bitterness would grow in my heart. And then that would be the thing that I poured upon my kids. Whatever is inside is what's coming out. And that means that if there's some aspect of pain or unforgiveness, worry, stress, whatever it is, whatever is inside is going to come out. And we can try to cover it up. I think we're all pretty good at that, probably in our own way. But God offers us something better than just a cover-up. He offers us this opportunity to release the pain, the brokenness, the things that we feel, and instead to receive his healing, to capture his promises, to live from a place of hope and faith that are not defined by the circumstances of our lives. In those early days, I couldn't imagine living my life from this place of thinking that I would wake up every morning knowing what my husband had done. But God has changed my perspective, and it really wasn't long until I started to feel that shift, that I wouldn't live life from that place. Instead, I would live life from a place of faith, of saying, God, I know that you're writing more to the story. I remember saying to the Lord in those first couple weeks, God, I want to be a good mom, and I want to lead my kids the way I'm supposed to, but God, I don't even know what that looks like, because nobody told me how to get through all of this and do all of that, and I don't have time to read books that would probably give me the answers. And I felt him say to me, Marie, do you remember the scavenger hunt you went on when you were a little girl? I will never forget that. I only went on the scavenger hunt one time. I was probably 5 years old. The ladies at our church had organized it for all of the young children in the Sunday school program. And we started in the sanctuary, and they gave us a clue. And we knew that if we figured out the clue correctly, we would find another clue. And at some point in this, we would find a prize if we did it all right. Our prize was a Christmas ornament, this little white angel, and I still hang it on my tree every year. But I remember the thrill of that. As you figured out that one clue and went to the next place, you never knew, am I going to find a clue or am I going to get the prize? And it felt like God was saying to me, Marie, that is exactly how I want you to see your life. I want you to see your life as if every day is this amazing adventure. And you never know where you're going to get a clue of my love for you, or where I'm going to surprise you with something. And I thought, God, that is just not how I was looking at my life. God sees things so differently than I do, usually the complete opposite. But I love that perspective, and I've tried to live that perspective. I don't get it right all the time. But I've tried to live from the place that every day is going to be an amazing adventure. Because every day I have this opportunity to partner with the Lord, to get to know him better, to see the way he's working in my life, to be a part of somebody else's story. It doesn't matter what my circumstances are. I get to choose how I live. I get to choose to live from a place of saying, you know what, the circumstances are what they are, but that doesn't mean that that's who I am. The circumstances are what they are, but that doesn't mean that it's all God's going to do in my life. I get to live from a place of adventure, of saying, okay, God, now what's next? And when I think about all of the now what's next that he's accomplished in the past 16 years, it's pretty amazing. Because if this wasn't my life, and I would have heard a story like mine, and I would have said to myself, what do I think her life is going to look like in 15 or 16 years? I'm not sure that I would have had much hope for her. Even though I know the Lord, I'm not sure that I would have been able to paint this extravagant story of hope for her. But that's exactly what God has done in my life, painted an extravagant story of hope. That very first Christmas in 2006, my son was 5, and he said to me, hey, Mom, could you get me a new dad for Christmas? And I said, oh, Bryce, it's not like going to the grocery store and buying a box of cereal. You can just pick one. And he said, I know, he'd have to love you, and we'd have to love him, and he'd have to love God. And so he's telling me what a 5-year-old boy thinks it looks like to find a dad. And I thought, okay, God, my kids need a dad more now than ever before. I don't know how you would do this, but I trust you. And if I think about one phrase that I've probably said most in the last 15 or 16 years of my life, it's, God, I don't know how you're going to do this, but I'll trust you. And I think about how different that was in the conversation that I had with the Lord 25 years ago when I lost my first daughter and had to say, God, I don't trust you. And it wasn't that I learned to trust God because of things I did. I learned to trust God because of the faithfulness of who he is. But he can take this thing that is our weakness and turn it around so that it becomes not necessarily a strength. I wouldn't say that it's my strength to trust the Lord, but I would say that it's the adventure. I love the adventure of trusting God and seeing what he's going to do next. And knowing that I'm not in control and being okay with that. Of not having to try to control everything that happens next, but to say, okay, God, what do you want to do? What's next on your list? And allowing him to unfold it. It's a far more freeing way to live than the way I used to live when I had all my ducks in a row, height-wise, alphabetized, and color-coded. In January that year, I started dating Dan, so just a month after Bryce's conversation. It wasn't what I would have thought would be the way God would do it, but I'm so grateful that he has. I love that part of our story, of watching the Lord unfold the relationship between Dan and his kids and me and my kids. I love the partnership that I have with Dan, the encouragement that he gives me, the way that he's invested in our family. And I can't imagine having lived all of these years without that in my life. God writes incredible stories. We got married in 2007 and suddenly had this blended family of 5 children. And a year or so later, I said to Dan, God is really putting adoption on my heart. And I said, I came through that season with my kids of them not having a father, and it's the reality that there are kids around the world that don't have a mom or a dad. And I feel like God is calling us towards adoption. And Dan said, Marie, have you forgotten that we have 5 kids? That means on any given day, there's the opportunity for 5 simultaneous crises. And he was right. And I didn't want adoption to just be this thing that he said yes to because I wouldn't stop asking. I'm definitely not the most patient person. So I said, okay, God, help me to be patient in this so that he can hear you instead of just hearing me. And so from time to time, I would say to him, hey, what's God speaking to your heart about adoption? I thought that sounded a whole lot better than what are you thinking? And finally, several years later, he said to me, Marie, God really is speaking to me about adoption. And I said, well, that's great. There's this wonderful Christian organization, Bethany Christian Services, right here in our community. In fact, it's less than a mile from where you work. They're having an informational meeting next week. Why don't I sign us up? Just like that. Because I was doing my research while I was waiting for him. So we went to the info session, and it was just a broad overview of domestic international adoption. And we enjoyed what we heard. We felt led to continue, and they said, okay, our next meeting is coming up in a couple weeks. We really focus in on international adoption. That would be a good next step for you in trying to determine, where is God calling us? So we signed up for the meeting, but between those 2 weeks, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. And on the morning of that international adoption meeting, my mom called me and said, Marie, your dad's being rushed to the hospital, and I think you should come. And I thought, God, how is it that after all these years of waiting for Dan to say yes, now you are saying not right now? I thought, okay, God, I don't know why it looks like this, but I'll trust you. We knew that in that season it really wasn't the time to pursue an adoption as my dad's diagnosis really unfolded. He lived for 8 months from the time he was diagnosed till he passed away. And even after he died, we thought, okay, we need to be here for my mom. We need to allow God to bring healing to us, to our kids. This isn't the right time. And so we set it aside a little bit, still knowing that we felt the Lord calling us to that, but knowing that for some reason he was asking us to wait. And so it was a couple years later, in the summer of 2014, we felt like the Lord was saying, okay, this is it. And so we started our process with Bethany. By this point, we knew that we felt called to international adoption. We wanted to adopt what is classified as an older child. When you turn 5 years old, you're considered special needs based on your age alone because it is so hard to find a family to adopt a child 5 or older. Most kids waiting around the world, they say over 90% of children waiting for families are older than 5. So we wanted to adopt an older child. We also knew that we felt led towards South Africa. When we started to explore the countries that Bethany partnershiped with, it seemed like this was really going to be a good fit for our family. Every country has its own set of parameters. Some would have said no to our family because we had more than 4 kids at home. Some would have said no because Dan was divorced. They all make their own rules. And so Bethany and our family felt like South Africa was a great fit. But the one thing about it was that South Africa requires you to stay 6 weeks in country to facilitate the adoption. And I thought, God, I don't know how this is going to work because we can't take all our kids with us, but I'll trust you. And so we started working through the paperwork. We had an openness to several different types of special needs. We started our process around July. In November that year, the partnering organization in South Africa said to us, here are the kids on our waiting child list. They had a list of about 13 kids that were available for adoption. All their paperwork was clear. They were kids that had been passed over multiple times. They said, here are the kids on our list. Why don't you pick a couple that you want more information on and let us know? And I thought, how do you look at kids and pick them? This is not how I thought this was supposed to go. I thought you were supposed to tell me what you thought would work. So we started to pray over that list, and I said, Dan, I don't really understand this, but I don't feel like any of these are our kids. I feel like God is telling us to pray and wait. And Dan, knowing my generalized lack of patience, said, well, if you feel like we're supposed to pray and wait, then that must be God. So we told the agency that we were just going to keep praying over the list. And they were a Christian organization, but they really didn't get that. They really wanted us to pick some kids that we wanted information on. But we just kept praying. And right before Christmas, there was this little boy added to the list. The moment I saw his face, I knew that he was our son. I called Dan at work and I said, you have to stop whatever you're doing and look at this list, because I think they just added our son to it. What do you think? So he looks at the list and he said, okay, you can call and ask them. So I called our Bethany office and said, hey, we'd like more information on this little boy. Is anybody pursuing an adoption with him already? Would his special needs match up with our openness? And they said, well, we close for Christmas tomorrow, and the agency in South Africa is closed for a couple weeks after Christmas, so we'll get back to you in about a month and let you know. And I remember that Christmas saying to the Lord, God, all I want is to know that he's our son. Finally, mid-January, they called us back and said there weren't any other families pursuing his adoption, and yes, his special needs would match up with our openness and we could move forward. And as we started to complete the paperwork, we also knew that we could only take one of our kids with us. Financially and logistically, traveling around South Africa, we were not going to be able to do this with a big caravan of people. And so we took our youngest because he was just a year older than the son we were adopting, and we had to leave the rest at home. And it was really, really hard. And I remember the point where we were in South Africa, and I was thinking, God, did we make a mistake? Because we had a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old that were floating between friends and family. My husband's kids were with their mom and their grandparents, but it was hard. And the first day when we went to the orphanage to meet our son, we spent some time with his caseworker before we met him, and she said, he's been here his whole life, 9 years. And she said every time that I would visit him, he would say the same thing to me. Have you found my family yet? And she said, I never thought that I was going to be able to say yes, because I had never placed a child his age in an adoptive family before. And I thought, okay, if he could wait 9 years, never losing the hope that she was going to find his family, I think we'll make it through 6 weeks. That was in 2015. And I look at our son now, and it feels like he's just always been a part of our family. I can't imagine life without him. But when I look at him and I look at our family, I also know that this wouldn't have been my life had I not walked through all of the pain and the hardship that I know. God does remarkable things. I wouldn't want any life different than the one I have. I authentically love what God has done with my life. It doesn't mean that I love everything that I've gone through. I don't love the event of the Amish schoolhouse for myself. I didn't love them for the Amish community, not for anyone. No one would choose pain and brokenness like that. But I love what God's done with it. And if he can take the broken pieces of my life and put them back together the way he has, he really can do anything. You know, we read words in the Bible like when Jesus says to the Father, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. We read stories like that, and sometimes it's hard to imagine those things being worked out in our life. But that's what God's done in mine. Not because I'm special, not because he looked at me and said, wow, Marie, you really went through some hard things, let me make it up to you. What he's done in my life, he's done because he loves me. And he loves us all the same. So if he could do what he's done in my life, give us relationship with the Amish community, surround us with people who love us, rebuild our family, even including our adopted son from South Africa. Allow me to have the opportunity to go into places like this and encourage others. If God could do these things in my life, what does he have planned for yours? You know, I think sometimes when we're going through hard things, it's easy to think that that's the end of the road. You know, that is the end of the story. This is what we're going to know. But the beautiful thing about God is that nothing is ever the end. There's always a new beginning that comes after we turn that page. The story never stops. And when you go through a hard season, the story doesn't stop for you. Instead, God offers you to walk through a redemption journey with him. Maybe like this father in Mark 9, where you have to admit, God, I do believe, but help my unbelief. Maybe a story like mine, where you wouldn't have ever chosen these circumstances, but you end up loving what God did with them. Every story is unique. But here's the thing I know. Every time that I share my story, people share their stories with me. And we all go through hard things. We all know pain and brokenness. When we're going through it, it's really easy to think we're the only one. It's easy to look around at everybody else and think that their lives look perfect and they must not have pain like we do. And in those places, it also becomes easy to think that God's love is seen through our circumstances. And we tell ourselves, well, God must love somebody else because their life seems easier. And that's not the way it works. But here's what I know. God's love is shown by the way he comes right where we are and he walks with us. Not because we're perfect, not because he pities us, but because he loves us, and every plan is based on redemption. It doesn't matter what our circumstances are. God sees the bigger picture. And yes, I get that sometimes he allows bad things to happen because we are all human and we make choices. But it doesn't mean that he doesn't already have a plan in place that he's actively pursuing to pour his love and his healing into our lives, to help us have hope and faith that we wouldn't have had otherwise, and to bring opportunities for us to then share that hope and faith with others. I mean, I think if there's anything that we've all seen in the past couple of years, it's just the darkness and the struggle and the stress that most people feel. Everybody needs to know more about Jesus. We all need more relationship with him. And for some people, that means their first time of ever hearing about this. The things that we go through, the hard places that we walk through, our journeys then give us eyes to see the brokenness in somebody else. And because we see it, we have the opportunity then to step into it and to say, I know what you're going through right now, and I know I don't have all the answers for you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, that I'm going to listen to you, and that I'm going to believe, even on the days that you can't, that God's not done yet. That he wants to pour healing into you, and that he has a good story to write in your life. That's what he does. God comes into our story, and he transforms the way we see ourselves, the way we see our lives, and then he inspires us to do the same for other people. And that's really what his redemption story is all about, I think. This place where our hearts are so transformed that we can't help but want to share it. Because we know we can't keep it to ourselves. Everybody else needs to know it too. So God, I thank you for who you are, for the way that you write your redemption story in our lives, for the peace that you bring on the hard days, for the faith that you give us that lights up the darkness in our lives. Lord, I thank you for the way that you purpose redemption, no matter how big or how small our circumstances are, God. And God, then I ask that you would help us to be part of someone else's redemption story. That our pain, the things that we've overcome with you, would then help us to see their pain, so that we can light their darkness and help them find their way to you. God, thank you for each person that's here and that's watching online. And God, I ask that today would be a day where our hearts are opened a little bit wider, where we feel drawn a little bit closer, and we have a desire to continue building our relationship with you. Amen.
Thank you, Marie. It was an encouragement to us, I believe. Not many more words I can add. So you're dismissed. Take a minute to visit with them, and we'll start church when time comes.